but they do extremely well when you take a subject matter expert who's capable of producing knowledge at a rate of 3 to 4 tokens a second, and then feed that context-rich ecosystem into ChatGPT, and then they can iterate on that at a rate of hundreds of tokens a second. And so that partnership, I think, is going to create a macro boom with time. In my mind, I compare this as the digital steam engine, right? I call it a logic engine. I know it's a statistical model that predicts the next word, but if you can give it enough rule sets and enough of a standard, then we can automate a lot of pieces of jobs over time. Secondly, the other aspect that I don't think the average consumer is aware of is we're starting to hit a bottleneck when it comes to how much data exists on the internet.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, liftoff.
Ladies and gentlemen, to my left is Alfredo Ayala, CEO and founder of Brash Labs. Alfredo, how are you doing today, sir?
Doing fantastic, right? Always good to catch up with you.
It's always good. It's always exciting. I always leave the conversation a much smarter individual and also well-fed today.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, we had a Korean barbecue thanks to Kelly Niles, Team Apollo member at Link 2. Thank you very much, Kelly. You and your lovely queen, Amy. But anyways, real quick, I was hoping that you could potentially, one, kickstart this interview off with a little bit of a background on who you are, what your passions are, so this way our audience can better understand why I think so highly of you.
Absolutely, I really appreciate that. So my name is Alfredo Ayala. I come from a background in accounting and finance, specifically within a traditional sense. I started in banking and then I moved my way to the Fortune 500 corporate world. There I worked specifically on accounting and finance systems. And one of the things I realized while working there is that the difference between a small company and a large company is their systems. I specifically work on the development of taking problems within an organization and then automating them either through Excel or other database-based systems, and then creating a system that can scale. I went into consulting a couple of years ago, and one of the things we realized that a consulting job very often took on a project, created a product from it, and then we only sold it to that one company, and then we walked away from it. The company owned that IP. So since then, what we've started to do is to move away from that model so that when we identify that a problem exists within an ecosystem or an industry, we create a solution to it, then we create a product around that, and then we go and try to monetize it at multiple places.
And here we are in a time of our life, many people call it a paradigm shift, where it's as if we're going into this digital world, this moment where we're transitioning from an analog system to, as mentioned, digital, decentralized, underpinned by software solutions. It sounds like you're potentially at the heart or even at the front of this movement. What do you say?
Yeah, I'm trying to be, for sure. So my background comes from a traditional Excel monkey space, and one of the things we quickly realized that you could not just scale these solutions infinitely. So we had to find ways that we could use technology to create better processes so that with time we can go towards that digitalization, right? The majority of the financial world runs on Excel. But with time, Excel isn't a good enough solution because the banking world still relies on legacy systems, and we need to expand it from where it is to where it's truly an entire digital consumption in terms of the information flows from one end to another, and it doesn't require someone somewhere to type by hand. Right now, that leads to a lot of human error. So anytime you go to a bank, you go in to put a wire transfer, you go in to make a large transaction, there's human interaction at certain spaces. And anytime you add human interaction, it leads to the probability of mistakes, which makes the overall ecosystem more costly.
And to that very point where you hear the threat of artificial intelligence taking over the potential roles of individuals getting into this new job market and landscape, it sounds scary, at least for me, where you have the potential of losing your job. But at the sake, if you're a business owner, this could be, not to shun away the human aspect of all business being underpinned by relationships, but to the fact of just task management and data input and admin type roles, AI could potentially alleviate some of those friction points or costly exposures.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the cases here in terms of, you hit a lot in that question. So
sorry about that.
No, not at all.
There's a lot to unpack in this fast-paced world that we're in.
100%. So let's first start with the probability of labor being consumed by AI, right? I do believe that AI represents, we're calling AI, but we're really talking about machine learning models and traditional algorithms that allow us to find patterns in large sets of data, right? So it's not magic, it's just ways to do math at a much faster pace, right? When I started doing this in the industry, the majority of this work would go from a report, then it would go to a CSV file, and then that would be turned into a massive Excel sheet with a lot of different pivot tables and steps so that we could work our flow through. The difference now when we have these AI engines or these large language model engines or these different algorithms, what it will allow us to do is to be able to bring like a digital workforce to specific tasks. So while having a person in the driver's seat is going to be 100% necessary, I believe for a minimum, possibly the next decade, what is going to be augmented is how much busy work does that admin have to continue to do. The places where individuals, humans fall short are the places where AI, in catch-all phrase, can help augment that. For example, data entry. Right now, I have a client who does massive reconciliations for a key system within the United States government. Their biggest problem is not being able to get their error rate below 1%. When we look at their error rate, they have hundreds of employees and they're at an error rate of only 1%. That's probably as humanly possible, as low as humanly possible as you can get. We've been having this conversation for 4 years now. But if in that step, when you go to do data entry, you can add some logic that validates it based on the expected patterns of data entered in the past, then we can continue to push that percentage down. Now, with the LLMs, they're statistical models, right? So it says it's predicting the next word based on the current word stated. So if you have any errors in there, it can go off on a tangent and not fight the right path. So that's where I believe teaming up a subject matter expert, somebody who's been handling the job for 10 years, and then giving them better tools that can help them shore up the areas they have issues with is going to create a much stronger economy. So we might see some shrinkage in areas where the human is being used as a blunt object, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean that there's already a lot of jobs where the individual's being underutilized, like customer service, because you expect them to stick to a script, because you expect them to stick to very specific language, and yet at the same time, that individual, their processing power, they could be handling much more of the project. So if you can offload the easy consumer redundant questions to something that emulates humanity well enough, and then have your staff focus on the hardest 10%, overall, your product will improve. That's what I hope is the type of hybridization we're going to be seeing. I've been researching and developing auto-generative chains of thought with different frameworks for the past 5 months. And I can say from everything I've tested so far, including large language models like ChatGPT-4, they currently can't really take a task and execute it themselves. But they do extremely well when you take a subject matter expert who's capable of producing knowledge at a rate of 3 to 4 tokens a second, and then feed that context-rich ecosystem into ChatGPT, and then they can iterate on that at a rate of hundreds of tokens a second. And so that partnership, I think, is going to create a macro boom with time. In my mind, I compare this as the digital steam engine, right? I call it a logic engine. I know it's a statistical model that predicts the next word, but if you can give it enough rule sets and enough of a standard, then we can automate a lot of pieces of jobs over time. Secondly, the other aspect that I don't think the average consumer is aware of is we're starting to hit a bottleneck when it comes to how much data exists on the internet. There's only so many websites that can scrape. There's only so many public works that exist that can be consumed without running into copyright laws and other issues. So what we're starting to see is the creation of taking a small set of data that you have that's augmented by an expert like myself or like yourself that understands a specific region of a market, and then you take that and you create a synthetic data set by having an LLM train itself on top of it. That kind of evaluation and taking that knowledge base from internal products and putting it outwards is going to grow over time. So that's where I believe that there's growth for these companies. The jobs are going to change. We don't have chimney suites anymore.
You're well versed in this vertical, especially within software solutions, SaaS. But I feel like with this movement in towards artificial intelligence or being empowered by large language models and things of that nature, I believe based on our conversations that Brash Labs is well positioned to excel and even provide a suite of products and services to enable others to leverage these very systems you're talking about. Do you mind diving into the weeds, or maybe not going into the too deep, but ultimately, can we talk about some of the things that you are working on or tooling within the Brash Labs ecosystem?
Yeah, so very low hanging fruit, and we're not the only ones doing it right now, but we're focusing on angelic workflow. And that's the concept of how can you take a task, break it up into subtasks, and then have models or code essentially work through multiple steps of that. I found that things that are rule-based, it does really well in this kind of workflow. So I created my own localized coding assistant. And I did it slightly differently where I don't need it to write entire files for me. What I do need it to do is to help me clean up and write specific functions. So I focused on that first. And what I found was that having that kind of logic system set up where you can go in, and this can be applicable to a lot of things. It can be applicable to insurance comparisons. This can be applicable to financial analysis. This can be applicable to form fill-outs, where you can say, these are the steps you're supposed to follow. This is where you're likely to get errors. Double check your work. We can actually automate those processes where at the start of it, you have a consumer or a subject matter expert prompting the chain every thought to make sure it's correct. But with time, as you build up that synthetic data and that understanding, you can automate more and more steps. One of the use cases that we're working on is the ability to be able to write contracts from this kind of understanding.
Interesting. Leveraging the know-how from experts within the legal sector?
Yeah, so we're partnering up with lawyers specifically. They have a lot of proprietary data. They have a lot of established information based on their caseloads. So we're creating pipelines to be able to take their files, clean up and remove proprietary information, and then take the substance of the clauses below that, and then be able to automate that to prompt them through a subject matter so that the context is stronger.
Interesting. Shifting gears, but still staying within the AI domain. What do you think is more impactful, or is going to leave more of a dent in the future of business? Is it going to be crypto or artificial intelligence?
So this is a hard question for me because I am 100% a crypto fanatic compared to the average user. But I believe that the current adoption curve of AI is outpacing crypto. Now, that may not be a fair comparison, right? When we think of the modern version of AI, we're talking about LLMs that probably sprouted within the last 10 years, but they're built on research that's been going on for decades, right? So this is something that people have been working towards for a very long time. Crypto also being able to have a settlement system that just exists and anybody can access is really important. But the difference that I saw was when I go sell a crypto implementation, I have to get people to believe in it. But when I go sell a AI implementation, the people are asking us for what other services we can add on to it. And so I think crypto still hasn't reached is ChatGPT-3 moment where the general public sees it and they say, I absolutely want to use that. I want to play with it. I want to jump right in. We just had a conversation with a gentleman at the restaurant we were at, and his exact words were, I can't trade crypto fast enough because the amount I trade is too low and the fees eat it up and the on-ramps are too difficult. So that tells me that someone who would be the perfect candidate, right? He was a GME, AMC believer. He was an ape that ate crayons per his words. He absolutely wanted into the casino, but it was still too much work for him. So I think we still have some UI, UX barriers to go about that. And I know you saw today that Bitstamp was bought out by Robinhood. That might be the type of changes we need to see where we have some consolidation to the traditional finance world to lower the barriers of entry for the average person. I know you and I are going to jump through hoops for it.
Yeah, absolutely. That seems like an easy bridge to cross for retail, but Can we also think about what's going on in the institutional sector from the large banks
Yeah.
like BNY Mellon that are custodying various assets to support things like stablecoins being created by entities that are playing within this field like Circle? Do you think, aside from your example, the Bitstamp and Robinhood acquisition, do you think that were you sold before that moment?
Yeah, so where my belief from crypto comes from is my intimate understanding of how difficult reconciliations are. I joined the crypto space in 2017 during that bull run, and at the time I was working in a space where we had 30 accountants, probably the same age that it was an open floor plan and we all face each other. So we would sit there typing away on Excel and we would all talk about crypto on a regular basis. And during that run, we made quite a bit of money. So I got into crypto by getting into the big three. And at the time that was Bitcoin, LTC, and XRP. I didn't even know what XRP did at the time. But because I was working on a massive implementation that included the big four and ultimately ended up failing in its entire purpose was to be able to reconcile employee benefits that were paid out by hours worked to the correct amount, I realized that on the back end, our financial system is missing robust data to be able to do those reconciliations. So when people come to you and they say, hey, how much did we spend in this type of expenditure at this Fortune 500 company, it would take a week to be able to pull all the information from all the same places. Now, I'm sure the people at home, just like my bosses, were like, this is in the ERP system, why can't you just pull it? Turns out that very often the information that's in the ERP system may be partially false. And that goes back to the first thing we were talking about, right? Where human error comes into play. And when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of transactions a month, if you have 1% of error with either an extra zero, a zero missing, or something else going on, you end up chasing pennies for a long time. So I'm going to talk in detail about the reconciliation that really taught me this. Was I was called in specifically to clean up union benefits for what at the time was like the third or fourth largest employer of U.S. government union workers outside of the military. And they were a company that focused specifically on janitorial and engineering services for large businesses like the courts system in California, stadiums, and that kind of thing. The biggest problem there was we could not have a clear view of what job site that employee was working at to be able to give them the contractual benefits as established per their union contracts. So this was a massive manual process. While during my time there, we took it from being a manual process that took 18 hours to a manual process that was done in 2 hours. But ultimately, that should have been done automatically on the back end during the paycheck system. But because that math wasn't being done correctly, somebody always had to sit down and do it by hand. So getting an insight to that level of reconciliation made me realize that having a payments network that every wallet was essentially an account would allow us to do that type of reconciliation really well. So one of the things that I hope to be able to prove with time is that if you have a business on the XRPL and you're receiving all your payments from the XRPL and you're making the majority of your payments from the XRPL, you should be able to reconcile that against your bank account or your ERP system relatively easily.
As long as that entity or individual is KYC, AML compliant, and is that still required?
Not for accounting purposes. Okay. Now, they would be required for regulatory purposes. If you're a business and you're using an XRPL account as your main business transaction, you should definitely do the AML and the KYC. That will lower a barrier to entry. Now, going back to barriers of entry, where we are today, the banking system doesn't like crypto off-ramps because of regulatory aspects still get in the way. So the types of companies that I'm talking about adopting this and being able to scale this when they're doing tens of thousands or millions of transactions per month, we may still be 5 years away from that. From what I've seen in the ecosystem, the adoption for crypto companies right now who are also using it for their accounting software are those that are directly built on top of it. I know we both use Uphold, right? They were the only one that provided XRP during the whole lawsuit process. So the way they're built and the way they do their public attestations, I've realized that they can probably do their accounting as described, but that's because their entire tech stack and system was planned out to be built this way. Legacy systems a lot of the time the bank and the payment networks are almost an afterthought because they send out a statement every month. Maybe you get an API directly into your ERP if you're lucky. If not, there's an accounting group, payments and receiving, who are hand typing this in. And then at the end of the month, a senior accountant or the manager has to reconcile that to see if everything was 100% captured. And the only way that's done is a comparison versus their bank statement. Now, if your payments network's directly tied into your ERP system, you shouldn't have to do that by hand. It should be capable of doing it itself just by doing an upload. Now, if people work in finance at home, they're going to be like, our system already does that. There are some systems that do comparisons like that, right? High-end Oracle systems, even QuickBooks, you can upload a statement and it'll do a comparison of the numbers for you, but it's like a smart dumb system where it might capture 80% of it because it doesn't actually understand all the context. With a rich reconciliation process from crypto, because the memo fields and the payments come in for a specific address, you should be able to go a step beyond that, where you create an entire audit trail automatically.
Interesting. You brought up Uphold, and thinking about them, I have to mention that I am a happy shareholder in Uphold, thanks to Link2's platform. This conversation, interview, this production is not sponsored by Uphold or Link2. But what I've noticed recently by pulling out some funds and liquidating some of my investments on Uphold's platform, liquidating digital assets, I was able to instantaneously push that liquidity from my Uphold account to my bank account in seconds. To your point, it's almost as if, yes, they're piped or built to accommodate these new future distributed ledger technology systems geared for the next era of finance. Like Uphold Services, they just brought that instantaneous liquidation feature, just as it's available on Venmo. People are already using these types of systems, and now we're just seeing the traditional markets and these new DeFi markets merging together. And so on that point is, as you are building your company, your venture, leaning into AI, aiming for what's called a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization empowered by AI, I want you to talk about the future or what your envision for this type of venture. And then I'd also like to talk about some of the growing pains you've experienced and maybe other companies that you're trying to emulate.
Sure. Long-term plans first, right? My hope would be that we can prove that by building on top of payment networks, tying in AI to automate, that we can continue to build a group of highly specialized subject matter experts. I am lucky enough to have a team that's global now, right? We have sales teams out of Australia. I have partners out of the UK and Europe that are allowing us to help this, and all across the United States. But they're subject matter experts, right? These are guys who have successful multiple exits. They're more there to help me sell the product than anything. And one of the cool things that we've been able to do is keep our administrative staff really low and just focus on getting subject matter experts that are executing on specific tasks. The way we've been doing this is that I've been building a proprietary system that knows what I'm building and I feed all my notes into, and then I gave access to that to my team and it disseminates it out. Companies that I am trying to emulate, NVIDIA. I want to be the most profitable company in the world.
Aren't they going through a split?
Yeah, they're going to go to a 10-to-1 split just because of their stock price getting so high.
It's a good problem to have.
It's a fantastic problem to have. Yeah, so that's a difficult question because I don't think I've ever thought about it in terms of companies. The reason why is that companies are organizations of people, and as a company grows, it changes to the staff that currently works there, right? So one of the things I told one of my early staff, we were having a conversation about this, and I was like, look, dude, the people who helped me start the startup, the people who helped me take the startup to the product, and the people who are going to be here in 5 years, they might not all be the same person, right? I've moved around enough in my career that I know that sometimes you get people that truly believe and they want to stay for the long term, but for the most part, everyone's just trying to make a living, right? And that's why the majority of us are in crypto. We're trying to get out of the rat race. So the companies that I'm trying to emulate the most are the ones that are capable of creating a culture, whether it's a small mom and pop in a local shop that does something, or whether it's a successful startup like YC Combinator, right? The best incubator in the world, where that culture lasts generationally without having the people who began it to stay there. And so the things that are important for me is I want to be able to work with people that I want to hang out with. That's what I love about working with you and everybody else in the ecosystem. I love being able to take a break from being in a dark room to come hang out with you guys, and it's genuinely a good time, right? And I want my staff to enjoy that. And I also want them to make enough money that the moment they decide they're no longer having fun, they can just walk away from it.
Yeah.
Right. I think if I can do those two things, regardless of how little, how much money we make in the long term, will be some level of success.
Appreciate the good vibes that we both share together. It's always a pleasure getting together with you and Mr. Kelly now is here. It means a lot to me. But with this fast-paced lifestyle, it's always important to surround yourself with like-minded people, especially in a sector that seems to be somewhat taboo to many others, shaking the tree to what they've known for quite some time. And on that thought, let's shift gears here. I want to talk about some of the things that we discussed at the lunch table when we were in Korean barbecue.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on previous financial models tossed around in the XRP community about the potential value of the asset itself?
Yeah, so I've been pretty vocal about this on Twitter, and you guys know me. My Twitter is event space, so I like to heckle people. I think the financial models in the space are specifically written for marketing purposes. You can see it because anytime there's a concerted effort to create a model, you'll see the same influencers reflected over again. The only reason I think that's problematic is because we're almost setting up the average retail investor who's coming into the slaughter, because we're giving them the expectation that you're going to be able to exit at massive multiples when we know for a fact that Ripple is selling below market price due to contract terms. And don't get me wrong, Ripple has every right to be making money. That's the entire that's the entire purpose of a business. But if there is a third party who's putting out a model that they purposely know is wrong for the purpose of views because their job is social media, it seems disingenuous to drive people down a path that could potentially lead them to getting financially hurt. That's where my main problem comes from it. I think we don't know what the price for XRP looks like, right? Because anytime you look at a financial model from JP Morgan or any of the big banks, especially when you're talking about a prospectus for an investment vehicle, whether it's an ETF or a specific fund family, a fund of funds or an index of funds, they will always tell you that past returns are not indicative of future return. The crypto space loves saying not financial advice and then dropping massive financial advice or tucking that really low. And I think that's problematic because it leads to a lot of disillusionment. And we have conversations about this all the time of like, how can we bring more people into the ecosystem? If people are only coming into the ecosystem because they can believe they can get rich, and then 5 years go by and they're not rich, they're gonna be mad. And I feel like that's where a lot of the market is right now. But if we could have a conversation about how amazing the technology already is, because it's almost near magic. As more XLSs roll out and as the Ripple team and the XRPL Labs teams and now all these different contributors continue to add in, and we're going to be able to do more things on chain, DeFi, lending, digital IDs, right? This is going to bring utility that can be extrapolated away where the average user doesn't know what's going on, but then you have access to do more things on chain, locking up XRP and then the price going up. That's where I say we don't know how much it could be, right? We're entering a period where the majority of US dollars have been produced in the last couple of years. So we're looking at hyperinflation at scale. So to me, it makes sense that the price of XRP is going to go from cents on the dollar to multiple dollars per XRP. But I don't think we have a good model to say what that really is. You know, when I first heard about Bitcoin, it was almost being used exclusively to buy drugs off of Silk Road. That's where my friends got it from. I even mined some Bitcoin.
You got the drugs?
Or yeah, 100%. Yeah. I was in college. And so I even buying some Bitcoin at home, but I threw it away and didn't care about it. But it's because it was just a plaything. But as more utility comes up, you can now see people who want to hoard it and see some wealth in it. I think the next step to that is the extrapolation where I want my mom to be able to tie into the XRPL and not know that she's tying into it. Because then she's gaining some utility out of it that's not proponent on her waiting for a moon date.
Yeah.
That's where I think we're winning.
Yeah, 100%. I think the next growth phase or when we step into wealth, it's going to be on a utility bull run, which means in order for that to occur, I would imagine that there's probably going to be some type of even crypto bubble that precedes before that. But to the topic of Silk Road, which I always find fascinating, is because here we are. Yes, this gentleman created an ecosystem or a pathway for others to source illicit substances and things of that nature. The gentleman who, fast forward to today, he's locked up, and I believe he's got 2 life sentences against him.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. Just very serious repercussions. But here you have a FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, who has basically just rug pulled the nation. And yes, he's getting some time behind bars, but no nearly as a serious repercussion as the previous gentleman, who I'm drawing a blank on his name. But ultimately, do you think that's fair? Do you think that there's something going on there?
I really despise FTX, right? And Sam Bankman-Fried specifically. The reason being that I think he used the connections through his parents to raise easy money to then launch one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in the world, right? That's what happened effectively. He was self-trading through his hedge fund, and they were allowed to go negative, and then they never made any money. How you run an exchange and never make money, it's crazy to me, but if they ran it as a business, they would have been able to print money. But in the conversation for Silk Road, I believe those 2 life sentences are there because of the general disdain for drug use that exists in the Western world. And even in the Eastern world, there's certain countries, you go into Singapore with what's legal in California, and they'll send you to jail. And so I know it's not a playing manner, but I think there's a compounding effect there. So on one end, while what SBF did was horrible, the majority of the people who lost money were young enough that they would be able to go back to work and they'd be able to build up their wealth again. Drug trafficking has been tied back as a means by which to finance so many horrible things that I believe that's what ties those 2 life sentences, right? Whether it's terrorism with the poppy fields out of Afghanistan, or whether it's the meth labs, the fentanyl, and the marijuana coming out of Mexico. Global drug use is still a war on drugs, still a problem. I don't have a solution for that, but I can understand why that was more difficult in terms of punishment. What SBF, I don't know if the time he got was fair, but at the same time, the American prison system is so punitive that when that kid comes out, he's not gonna be the same, right? So my hope is that he makes it through all right and that he learns a lesson. And I'm sure he'll launch another business. He just does it without it becoming another scam.
Yeah. Hopefully his parents are around at that time when it comes out, just for the sake of having a relationship with them and things of that nature. Shifting gears here, we talked a lot at lunch today. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you felt like we should be, or that the greater population should be talking about? This is your opportunity. The stage is yours. What are some things that you want to get off your chest that you may not have shared as of today?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing that's missing context-wise for the average user of AI is how important your data has become. And we all already feel it. We know that we're the product in Web 2, right? Google takes our information, they sell it to ad companies. Facebook takes our information and they do stuff with it. The big 4 companies are really controlling that, but the more AI systems are being built into the ecosystems, the more other people are benefiting from your knowledge base information, right? And I think going forward, being able to run localized models, being able to have as much of the information captured yourself for self-insight is going to be really important. If you captured every one of your outbursts while you're driving, you'd be able to create almost like a self-therapy session of being like, why am I having such a hard time on these days? What's going on? And so those self-reflection points. I graduated in 2006, so the internet I remember as a child was much freer than the internet that is today. Right now, it feels like 4 companies own the majority of applications, and if you jump back and forth, you end up in their ecosystems. But I remember when the majority of the internet was just decentralized individuals who wanted to put out information, professors who wrote papers and websites and blogs and maintained them. And a lot of that has gone by the wayside. Everybody has a Medium article today, and that's just regurgitated from 3 other Medium articles, right? So the quality of work is going down as we've been focused more on outputting more and more of it. So what's out on the internet is becoming less valuable. But that means what people are keeping internally, a combination of their chat logs, their own statements, their own document files, thoughts they have in notes, if you can bring that together over time through your own prompting, you can analyze that. What do I really think about this crypto stuff? Have those conversations with yourself. Record your messages in the conversations you have with other people, feed that into it, and then go back and look at it and be like, is this actually how I feel? Or is this what I thought sounded good at the time, right? Because when you objectively look at that and be like, what am I putting out there? If you're not conscious of, and I know you're very conscious of this, right? You're like, you have a messaging style, love you mucho, you give out positive energy. I think that's fantastic. But I think too many of us, and myself included, if I'm not careful, I'll get drawn into the algorithm's black and white argument in terms of A or B, and it tries to push you to rage bait, right? We've all seen the clickbait articles of, you wouldn't believe what happened in this, blah, 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 right? The more time goes on, the more we're gonna need systems to be able to help us understand that other people are trying to manipulate our emotions to get a result out of us because we're currently the product. Right.
Do you think that we're already seeing some types of solutions that address that type of situation where you're on social media, let's just say X, and maybe the contributor puts out a narrative that, let's for the sake of the coronavirus, blah, 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 blah. But then there's a section just below this that's a fact checker or providing those types of solutions.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think the fact that we now have more fact checking, I think that we try to hold.
As long as that data that's feeding the fact checker is also correct too. So back to your question, it's like,
how do we know that's correct?
That data is pure in essence. Where are we getting it?
And there's a problem there because you can never find 100% pure data, right? I had an argument about this in grad school with a professor because he came in, he told me that The Economist was non-biased. And I told him it was a right-leaning publication. And over time, over the last 10 years, I've been proven right. But the reason, understanding why publications have to pick a bias is part of understanding what's happening to us in society, right? Part of the conversation we had at lunch was that the majority of individuals live in the space between A and B, whatever extremes those are, right? Whether we're talking about politics in the United States, drug use, police force, anything that's controversial, the majority of people live in the truth that's in the middle because life's complicated, right? Individuals are complicated. There's a lot going on when something goes wrong that can trigger those things to happen. But these algorithms and the systems that are based on keeping our attention, whether it's shorts on YouTube, TikTok, or even doom scrolling on Twitter, is all about showing you something that's gonna keep you engaged, right? It's gonna make you click on that. It's gonna make you retweet it and call them an idiot. The people who are best at manipulating people's emotions, whether through clickbait or otherwise, are the ones who are the fastest at growing their accounts right now. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all of us engaging in communal clickbait is healthy for us as a society. I hope that we start to see more tools like this, and I hope that as a society we can walk ourselves back from this type of A or B extremist posts, right? Because I think we're entering a period where we're starting to see laws that are becoming more nationalistic. And most of the time, that's not a problem. I'm a massive fan of the United States. If I need to pick up a gun and go fight for it, I 100% would. But at the same time, I know that as being a student of history, when you look back, any times that you have an uptick in this type of law, you end up going to war. I don't want to see millions of people die globally. There already are with the relatively small engagements we have going on. If we were to see total war, we're at a level of mechanization that we've never seen before, right? We might set back generationally 20 to 40 years. And that to me is scarier if it's happening without intent, right? If you want to feed into the algorithm and you want to be angry all day and you're doing it by choice, that's your choice to do that on that day. But if we're just getting off of work and you've been dealing with your kid and your dog's sick and a bunch of things are going wrong, and then the algorithm exploits those emotions to make you angrier at somebody else who you don't know, I think that sets a dangerous precedent, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen an uptick in violent crime in the United States, in the murder, stealing, breaking into houses. And I think that's now that we're aging, right? Because you and I are about the same age. We grew up through one of the safest periods of American history. It was one of the most prominent. I don't have any kids, but if I do, I want to make sure that they grew up in a society that would be safer for them and not worse. And I think that takes all of us to be able to engage. Now, at the start of this conversation, I talked about how on Twitter, I feed the hate algo, right? It's really something hard to be able to give up, because that dopamine dump of being able to downvote someone or call them a dork just goes such a long way. But I think it shows us how individually right now we might all be more connected, but we all feel more separated. So that sense of society doesn't really exist. It's why us as builders or as developers, when you meet somebody else who's on the same path, you tend to make a relationship, because we might only see each other every couple of months, but it goes a long way because we're having the same experiences. I think that type of loneliness is going to be the biggest problem going into the next century.
Do you think that there's, and I know we'll shorten up this conversation towards the end, we're winding down, but before do you think these next generations are in a way dwarfed by the COVID virus or things of that nature, and will become more dependent on solutions like AI?
The short answer is yes. Now, I don't want to trash an entire generation.
No, not at all. Do you think because of the pandemic, in result of it, people will become more dependent on the solutions that were in a way birthed in guise of the pandemic?
Yeah. I think it's a significant issue, and I think it's not a new issue. But I do believe that the technology is accelerating it, right? So there's this amazing speech that was done by Charlie Chaplin back in the 1920s or 1930s as a part of his movie called The Dictator, where he's essentially playing a version of Hitler without saying it. And at the end of the speech, he talks about how he doesn't want to be a dictator, how we have trains, radios, and planes. All it's done is to help separate everybody. And I think that the pandemic and everybody getting locked down, having to do so much over Zoom, while very convenient, it also took away some of that human interaction, right? The town where my grandparents are from, where now both of them are buried, is when I was growing up, we would go down there every winter and sometimes every summer. And it was a town of 5,000 people. It's grown significantly since then. Now everybody has a cell phone, but it has a center town square. And the only thing to do at night was for everybody to go down to the town square, get a drink, get a food, sit on a bench, and just talk to other people. So that meant even if you didn't like the guy across the street, you were seeing him every day. You were having a conversation with every day. Even if you argued with people about who won the mayor candidacy, you still had to interact with them because they were selling you tacos and stuff. The more we remove ourselves from the human aspects, if we don't find ways to make those legitimate connections, to try and bring people together, then we're going to run into more of these problems. I read a lot of research papers. That's how I'm able to take the ideas that are cutting edge and implementing it into our solutions. And I saw a Stanford PhD who put out a research paper about how AI models were going to help us learn how to communicate with each other better. And I think that's the wrong approach. Right? I think if you want to learn how to communicate better, instead of putting more technology in the place, you'd be removing technology, right? You should be coming into a room and remove everything else and then do nothing but sit there and talk to that person and find a way for yourself to be understood. And that might be difficult, right? It might take time. You might not learn how to do that. I got to give credit to my significant other. I would not be this versed of a communicator if she didn't meet me when I was 24 and then start asking me why. She was like, why are you this angry? Why are you this upset at the world? Why do you think there's so much injustice?
Why are you this handsome?
I wish. And the more we had those conversations, the better I got to be able to express myself. And the more I realized that, a lot of the time, anger isn't the right response. But it's the easiest. And so many of us let that win. We just fall into that.
Yeah, even just beyond emotions, I think we allow ourselves to get distracted by what's going on in the daily.
Yeah.
That daily for me could be a positive or a negative. And let's just say for the circumstance, let's say it's negative. Well, there's still a silver lining
Absolutely.
involved and we can't lose focus on that, because when we do, then we lose touch on maybe like the beauty of life, maybe call it God, maybe call it universe, because I feel like every day brings something really interesting, especially when you're on pursuit of your passions and things of that nature. It's more of the universe or God works in a ways that seems to be a blessing. And so that's where I tend to default on when navigating and exploring and building my own channel or platform. And anyways, Alfredo, before I let you go, how could those in the audience learn more about what you're working on at Brash Labs and the many projects that you have under Brash Labs domain?
Yeah, so right now we're still a stealth startup. I've actually removed our website and I've kept a lot of this stuff under wraps. And the purpose for it was I wanted to make sure we had a product out that we could be proud of before I started onboarding people. That was something that was really more important to me, right? So if you're interested in following our journey, you can find us at Brash Labs on Twitter, and you can find myself at F Ayala _ Brash, I believe. That's my username on Twitter. Sorry, I just want to say one thing before we get off. And it was your concept about the beauty of life.
Yeah, please.
Right? I totally agree with you, because it's so easy to get stuck in the negativity. It's so easy to look at this. And
It's so easy to get stuck in that dark room all day long and then lost in your thoughts. I get it.
And to be like, oh my God, this is the worst time in human history. And it's, nah, this is the best time in human history. We might be having a little blip right now in terms of macro instability, in terms of macro trends downtrending, in terms of more people getting hurt. But there is not a time in history where we could go back that it would be better for the majority of human life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In perspective of the greater population, but now focusing on us as individuals, I feel like even right now there's no better time, or there hasn't been a time where this entrepreneurial spirit has been so alive.
Right.
And here I am interviewing you. Before engaging into this Web3 ecosystem, I was selling business insurance for 10 years. And it was a great career. It paid the bills. I did very well. But one thing for me that always stuck out was I was always writing insurance policies for others that were on their pursuit of passion. And it was always something that I got to see the fire and spark and stoke in their eyes while I'm writing this policy. But now here we have the opportunity to take advantage of this once in a lifetime opportunity, where it seems like because of new cutting edge technologies, maybe the bear has been poked, or the tree has been shaked. There's been a changing of the guard, and so now we have an opportunity to maybe pursue a passion or an endeavor that we never once thought was within our reach. And that's why, for me, I feel like on this new pursuit of passion, every day brings something, maybe negative or positive, but regardless, you just have to take one step back and just look at it through a different lens, and then realize that maybe not just because of that one occurrence, but maybe because of a sequence of events, it actually leads to something even greater.
100%.
And so that's where I've just been trying to default as of late, for quite some time now. And that seems to be working well for me and those close to me like yourself. But Alfredo, it's been quite the privilege. I'm going to go take a nap after today's long conversation and quite the amount of Korean barbecue that we inhaled. I appreciate you, and I can't wait to see Brash Labs and the other endeavors that you're working on go live and take over the world.
Absolutely.
You've got all the talent in the world to do, sir.
I really appreciate it. Our next product that should be going live and then we should start marketing and announcing soon, it's going to be called Vinmint. It is how we're going to be tokenizing real world assets on the XRPL to be able to bring comparative insurance and other utilities around vehicles. So I look forward
You can't end this conversation with a bomb like that, Alfredo. I think we might have to come back and do another interview if you're tokenizing assets and bringing it on chain.
I would love to. And I'll bring my co-founder so we can have a conversation about the funding process and how we've gone along and built that over the past year.
That would be wonderful. I'm going to hold you to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, at some point, the perception of Ripple's role in the ecosystem and the on-chain tokenomics are going to invert so that people will FOMO in from Ethereum, from Solana, from the other ecosystem.
If they can do low cost transaction fast, it suppresses a 6% loss on Swift. I mean, won't the action supersede what people's perceptions are?
That means that we have profit extraction only for the largest players in the ecosystem at the cost of the everyday person. And that leads to an ecosystem that can be predatory. And you know, this happens on any chain. Every chain needs to be able to extract value in some fashion, but it seems disingenuous to me to call it decentralized and then not a security, and then realize that when it's being sold as a security, that's when the value is being extracted from.